So good to see you. So here's my first question. How big a blast is it writing Space Ghost?
I'm having such a good time writing this series. Yeah, Space Ghost. It's been such a fun opportunity to write this character. Uh, yeah, for fans of my work on Savage Avengers, the unorthodox found family of that book, I think you're gonna find a lot to like about my run on Space Ghost. For those who aren't familiar with the character, though, this is a perfect chance to get in on the ground floor. You don't have to have read anything. You don't have to have watched any episodes. I did all that for you. So this is a perfect jumping on point. Brand new continuity. We'll sort of be establishing Space Ghost as a character. And for those who only know him from the talk show, you're going to get to see why he's the greatest hero in the galaxy.
Well, so you're a bit younger than me, more than a bit. How did you first discover Space Ghost or
Yeah,
encounter Space Ghost?
my first encounter with Space Ghost was the Coast to Coast years. I grew up in the '90s, and so that was sort of my primary experience. It wasn't until I interned at DC Comics in college that I started to learn a little bit more about comics history. I got to know more about kind of the legendary names in the business, and Alex Toth being one of them. And I believe DC had done a reprint of the Space Ghost trade, or somehow I got a copy of Joe Kelly and Ariel Olivetti's relaunch of the
Mm-hmm.
character. And I really was kind of like, I was blown away. I was like, oh, he's not just an ironic talk show host, that he actually is kind of a hero in his own right. And that's when I got to learn more about the character, where I like to bill him as Batman by way of Flash Gordon. He's sort of this Cape Crusader of the galaxy, that he's fighting interstellar pirates and criminals with the help of his sidekicks, Jan, Jace, and their pet monkey Blip. And he's using, instead of a utility belt, he's got his power bands that allow him to use fire and ice and lasers, as well as his force fields and his inviso belt, which sort of lends into the ghostliness of the Space
That
Ghost.
was my favorite part as a kid. Yeah.
And so, yeah, you put all these things together and you realize, like, oh, this is a character that's got so much potential. And that's not even including the deep stacked bench of iconic villains. Space Ghost has villains that are just as iconic as Batman or Spider-Man or the Flash, because Alex Toth was just throwing out fastball after fastball with all of them. And the cool thing for me being able to write this series is Space Ghost, as the original cartoon, the original '60s cartoon, and the '80s revival. Those really subsisted based on energy and vibes and just the amazing concepts and designs that Alex Toth created. And that's the best thing about writing this as a comic, is that we have a little bit more of a runway, so we're able to really dig in deep and delve further into these characters than any other medium has before. There's a wide universe out there for Space Ghost to explore, and I'm excited to take readers along for the ride.
And you bring up a really great point that in the 60s, uh, and for probably like 3 decades of my life, I had no idea that there should be a backstory. So that's an
Yep.
interesting kind of thing. You just got presented these Saturday morning characters.
Yeah.
They existed. You knew nothing about them. I think I may have told you privately, I have the Big Little book. That was
Yep.
my first exposure. And there's really nothing about his origin there. There's
Right.
I have the Gold Key comic, and there's like one
Comic related
panel
one.
referencing a time,
Yeah.
the teacher.
Yeah.
So you've got a totally blank slate.
And I think that's been the greatest gift, being able to write this, is that we're able to take those core concepts of Space Ghost and Jan and Jason Blip, as well as all of Space Ghost's villains, and we're able to kind of add additional context to it. Things like, how does Brack, how do we sort of integrate him organically into this universe, this kind of wide-ranging, crime-ridden universe that the Galactic Patrol has no hope of really kind of quelling. And that's why Space Ghost goes out night after night to try to stop pirates from picking off distant colonies. So having like a wrinkle for Brack, how does he fit into something like this? Or how does Zorak, how do we kind of give him a fresh coat of paint in a way that, he's more than just Space Ghost's Joker? How do we make him like a really reinforce him as Space Ghost's arch nemesis? And as I was kind of looking at all these characters, they all fit into these really cool archetypes. that we're able to kind of add additional context to.
Yeah.
So we one of the big reference points for this book was Batman: The Long Halloween, and the way that Batman kind of faces an entire gauntlet of his enemies, and it becomes like almost like a Gotham World Tour, where we're able to see like the best and brightest of Batman's enemies. And we're doing something very similar in Space Ghost. We have a lot of self-contained done-in-one adventures in this book that will sort
Oh,
of
that's good.
allow us to kind of follow Space Ghost, as he fights enemy after enemy after enemy, but also how does his dynamic with Jan and Jace evolve? Um, you know,
Well, that brings up a question for me. Like,
yeah,
obviously, in your career, I know you can write grim and gritty,
mhm,
and and they also tend to be Avengers. No
yeah,
pun intended or
yeah,
reference to any earlier work you did.
right,
But you talked about those characters as a family, found family, but this is still different. Space
mhm,
Ghost is kind of not just mentor, but father. So
yes.
how does that change for you? Because that's a new dynamic in
You
your
really you
writing.
nailed it on the head. I think that's really the heart of this book. It's the emotional through line of this. Something as I was rewatching all the old episodes of Space Ghost as well as the '80s revival and rereading all the comics and taking 45 pages of notes on all of it. The thing that really stood out to me is that this guy doesn't just have one sidekick; he has three. And that's something, that is reinforced in the text. How important Jan and Jason Blip are to Space Ghost and his mythos and what makes him stand out. But it's one of those things, it came out, the original Space Ghost came out the same year as Adam West's Batman. So at that time, people were not
Yeah.
questioning why does he have kid sidekicks. That was just sort of people thought, oh, well, that's a cool way to kind of get kids more invested into this cartoon. But in 2024, people would think like, why does he have sidekicks? Doesn't this seem wildly irresponsible? And so that's something that we're addressing in the very first issue. Our first issue, without spoiling too much, it is about how does Space Ghost wind up in Jan and Jace's orbit. There's a pirate attack on their colony, and Space Ghost happens to try to stop it. And it's sort of like, how do these kids wind up kind of in his orbit?
Yeah,
And
I think that's in the preview pages that were released
yeah,
too. So there's
you
hints
kind of
of it.
you see what happens to Space Colony Omicron. When Tanzit and Brago and Lurker and One Eye and the other space pirates attack. And it's a really cool kind of way of getting into Space Ghost world by giving the readers a point of view character. In the same way that, say, like Kitty Pryde once was a point of view character for the X-Men, Jan and Jace are sort of they're our through line into Space Ghost in his world. And when they first meet him, they're not quite sure what to make of him. He can cut a very imposing, intimidating figure, especially when he's beating up space pirates. And that becomes, I think, the real through line of the series is not just Space Ghost having this exciting, cosmic action against a gauntlet of iconic bad guys, but it's also how did Jan and Jace go from being these kind of orphaned rescues to becoming sidekicks and trusted partners, and then eventually kind of a found family in their own right. And how does Space Ghost wind up evolving with that? Um,
Yeah. What kind of guidelines, if any, Warner
yeah.
Brothers gives licenses this to Dynamite? Does anybody in licensing there say like these are the rules?
Um, Honestly, there's not a ton. I was when I first approached this project, and my editor Joe Rybant approached me with Space Ghost. The first thing that I asked him, I said, "Well, there's not really like any sort of continuity or backstory here. Is it all right if I came up with something on my own?" And both Dynamite and Warner Brothers were very positive about that. They've given us a lot of latitude on this book. And I think they've only given me kind of a handful of things, like saying, "Hey, can you tweak this one thing?" or like, "Hey, this idea, maybe we don't do this." But for the most part, they've been really great about just letting us kind of take this to the limit. This really does feel like a book that comes kind of straight from me and straight from artist Jonathan Lau, with very little interference whatsoever. I feel like this book has really been a gift in a lot of ways. And I think it's because our licensors at Warner Brothers have given us such an amazing amount of latitude to be able to reinterpret and recontextualize these characters in a way that kind of makes them as character driven and dramatic as possible, but also still honors the original vision that Alex Toth had with the original Hanna-Barbera cartoons.
Yeah. Now, originally, the first time around in the 60s, at least, Space Ghost was kind of an anthology show with the Herculoids.
Yeah,
And so, some people, link a lot of those action heroes together without spoiling much or
sure.
anything. Are you allowed to play in other places like
Not
that?
at the moment. We're going to focus on Space Ghost, because somebody like the Herculoids, that is a separate license, and just in the legal sense of things. And also, like, I know that like Future Quest exists, and Jeff Parker and Doc Shaner did such an amazing job, kind of doing a jam band with all the Hanna Barbera superheroes,
Mhm.
that never say never. If Dynamite called and said, "Hey, we want to do a crossover with Thundercats," or we want to do something with Johnny Quest, I would be there in a heartbeat. But yes, for now, Space Ghost by himself has so many cool things to explore that I don't know if I have the runway yet to deviate from that. But if so, I have asked already. I would love to do something with Teen Force. I know
Mhm.
they're from the 80s revival, but they were really fun. I kind of liked the idea of like what happens when like Jan meets a boy who's not her brother and not Space Ghost. But no plans at the moment. But never say never.
Yeah, so what I'm looking for really is there going to be a Blip versus Gleek story?
uh,
Monkey
Blip is
versus monkey.
Blip is so fun. I I we have a plan for a blip centric issue a little bit down the road. I think not this next issue I'm writing, but the one in after. No, I think it's two after that, one or two after that. But if it all goes according to plan, it might be my favorite issue of the whole run. Um, yeah,
Excellent.
Blip is a very important character in this book. I don't want to spoil why, but you'll know why, or you'll have an inkling as to why by the end of issue one.
Look, any one of us knows. Monkeys are like cheese; they make everything better. So of
Yeah,
course he's very important. So
it's such a specific choice in the original cartoons that there was no way that I could not have Blip in this. Like it's so specific that I felt like I felt it was very important to find a reason for him to exist in this book. And yeah, he's more important than you know.
all right, and it does sound like if Dynamite were to extend the license, you'd come back. You have plenty more
Absolutely,
ideas.
absolutely. Dynamite has been really great. They've given us a really generous runway to start. I've already planned out over a year's worth of story, and I there's plenty of room for more. The thing about the way that we're structuring this, like I said, the Long Halloween was a big influence, and so we're doing a lot of self-contained, done-in-one stories for this.
Hmm.
I feel like a lot of the books that I'm responding to most in the market are things like Ryan North's Fantastic Four or Steve Orlando's Scarlet Witch or Jed McKay's Moon Knight, all of which have really kind of leveraged that done in one storytelling in a really nice way. And
Yeah.
so that's something that I thought was really important to do for Space Ghost, is that we want to see as many villains as possible. We want to pit him up against Brack or the Widow or Zorak or Moltar or Metalis and the rest of the Council of Doom, plus anybody else that I can fit. And so done in ones are really like an effective way to kind of like get readers sort of the maximum amount of story real estate without
Yeah.
kind of stretching it out over a long mega arc. We will have the occasional two-parter, and that's when we really want to ramp up the tension, when we really want to show that
Yeah.
Space Ghost is on his heels. And maybe there might be room for a three-parter down the line. But yeah, we're really trying to make it that anybody who picks up a Space Ghost comic, they get a full self-contained storyline and something that's like a real satisfying chunk that gets to explore a brand new villain, but also gets to kind of add new wrinkles to what Space Ghost's life is going to be like with these three new sidekicks that he's sort of begrudgingly adopted.
Yeah. You get him his teens. It's a little bit tough. So all right, I can hardly wait, honestly, and you know that because as soon as I saw the announcement, I'm like, David, we got to talk
Yes,
because
absolutely.
I love Space Ghost. So this is super exciting, and I love that a new generation is going to get to experience it with one and dones, because
Yeah.
I think that's how you get a kid to read it.
Yeah.
Is there you go. So thank you for this time, and
Of course.
best of luck with this book.
Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it. And anybody who's listening, you can still pre-order Space Ghost at your local comic shop. Issue 1 drops May 1st, the Wednesday before Free Comic Book Day. And yeah, we've got some amazing covers. Francisco Mattina, Bjorn Behrens, Jay Lee, and Michael Cho. We've also got blank covers, foil covers, virgin covers, line art covers. You name it, we've got lots
And
of
a
stuff.
Gold Key tribute cover, which is what I love the most, and I never order variants specifically, but that one I have to have.
And
So
Michael, who did that variant, he is committed for at least 12 issues. So yeah, so if you like that cover, stick around because he's doing plenty more.
Space Ghost!
Thanks for watching. Please hit the subscribe button to make sure you don't miss out on any Fanboy Planet video content. And visit fanboyplanet.com for other features, reviews, interviews, previews, and of course, listening to the Fanboy Planet podcast. And remember, use your powers for good.